The night before losing his diner to foreclosure, Eldon Marsh fed a stranger who forgot his wallet for free. That stranger was Keanu Reeves. And what happened next, nobody saw coming. There are places that hold a town together without anyone noticing. Not landmarks, not monuments, just a corner building with a hand-painted sign, a counter worn smooth by decades of elbows, and coffee that smells the same at 7 in the morning as it did when your parents used to bring you here as a kid. Marsh's Diner on Callaway Street in Harwick, Ohio was that kind of place. The kind you don't think about until it's gone, and then you think about it all the time. Eldon Marsh had been standing behind that counter since he was 23. 58 now, broad through the shoulders with hands that moved without hesitation. The hands of someone who stopped needing to think about what they were doing a long time ago. His father Walt had opened the diner in 1978 with a second-hand griddle and a stubbornness that became something of a family trademark. When Walt passed the business to Eldon, it was understood as a responsibility, not a gift. Eldon had carried it that way ever since. His wife Corinne had been beside him for 28 of those years. Warm voice, the kind of smile that made first-time customers feel like regulars. She remembered names, orders, surgeries, grandchildren. Together they had built something that went beyond the food. People came to Marsh's because the food was good. They kept coming back because someone there was genuinely glad to see them. But the years had not been kind to small diners in small towns. 7 years ago, a developer named Garrett Hollis arrived in Harwick with money and no particular attachment to what was already there. He launched the Harwick Grill Group, 4 locations, bright signage, digital menus, a marketing budget Eldon couldn't have matched in a decade. The food was fine. The parking was easy. Customers drifted, the way customers do, toward whatever was newer and louder. Eldon watched the numbers fall and did what he believed was responsible. He borrowed $320,000, part to renovate the kitchen, part because his son Dex had come to him with a plan. A second dining room next door, a way to compete. Dex was 23 and full of momentum. Corinne reminded Eldon that Walt had taken a chance on him once, that fathers were supposed to do that. So he signed the papers. 8 months later, Dex was gone. Columbus, Corinne found out. Something in technology. No note, no conversation. The second dining room sat unfinished. The debt stayed. And without the revenue Dex had projected, the loan became a weight the diner couldn't carry. Eldon cut hours, renegotiated with suppliers. He and Corinne stopped taking full salaries. It wasn't enough. By October, he had known for months the foreclosure notice was coming. He simply hadn't said it out loud. The last night fell on a cold Tuesday in late October. There was a particular kind of grief in doing ordinary things for the last time. Measuring coffee into the filter. Stacking plates in the same order they had always been stacked. Corinne cried once, briefly, in the back hallway. Eldon heard it. He said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. Just before 7, Terrence Biddle walked in. He was Hollis's financial officer, thin, tidy, a man who came in every few weeks for a coffee to go. That evening he ordered his usual and stood at the counter while Corinne poured, already on his phone, voice carrying without him seeming to care. Hollis locked in the debt purchase 3 months ago. Bank was glad to get it off the books. Once the foreclosure clears tomorrow, the property goes to auction and we move to bid. He's got the number set at 565 to make sure no one else gets close. Parking structure on the Callaway side ties into the new grill location going up on 5th. Corinne stopped moving. Eldon stood at the pass-through, a dish towel folded over his forearm. The refrigerator hummed. Walt's old clock ticked above the register. Biddle took his coffee and left without looking at either of them. There is a difference between losing something and having it taken. Eldon had spent months telling himself the diner's troubles were the result of time and circumstance. What he'd just heard was something else. Hollis hadn't outcompete him. He had waited, purchased the debt months ago, positioned himself to take the wreckage and said nothing. Just let the calendar do its work. Eldon set the dish towel down, took one slow breath, then went back to the stove. Corinne appeared at the pass-through and looked at him. He met her eyes for just a moment. Then they both went back to work. They were not the kind of people who stopped in the middle of things. A little after 8, the bell above the door rang. The man who walked in didn't announce himself. Gray hoodie washed too many times. Dark jeans, small tear at the left knee. Baseball cap pulled low, ordinary sneakers with considerable mileage. He settled onto the stool at the far end of the counter, farthest from the window, closest to the wall. "What's good tonight?" "Blue plate special is the pot roast," Corinne said. "Mashed potatoes, green beans. And I made the apple pie this morning." "That sounds exactly right. I'll take both." Eldon cooked the meal the way he cooked every meal. The pot roast had been going since mid-afternoon. Mashed potatoes from scratch, finished with butter he had never once reduced regardless of what the food costs were doing. He plated it the way Walt had taught him. Generous but not careless, every element given its own space. The man ate quietly. Halfway through, he set his fork down. "This is really good. The kind of cooking you don't come across much anymore." Corinne paused. "Thank you. He's been doing it a long time." "You can tell," the man said, and went back to eating. When he finished, he reached into his hoodie pocket, checked it twice, moved to the small backpack beside him, opened both compartments. His expression shifted. Not panic, but a genuine, quiet distress. "I'm really sorry. I think I left my wallet at the hotel. I don't have anything on me." Corinne looked at Eldon. Eldon looked at the man. $22. Almost certainly the last money Marsh's diner would ever take in. Tomorrow morning the foreclosure would be finalized. The counter, the clock, the coffee pot in the same spot for 20 years. None of it would be his anymore. Eldon shook his head once, slowly. "Don't worry about it. This place won't be mine after tomorrow morning anyway. You came in, you sat down, you enjoyed your meal. That's enough." Corinne added softly, "It really is. Knowing someone enjoyed the food, that's always been the point of all this." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and extended his hand across the counter. Eldon shook it, firm, held a beat longer than a standard handshake. The man turned to Corinne and nodded with a deliberateness that felt more meaningful than words. "I'll come back tomorrow. I promise." The bell rang once as he stepped out into the night. Eldon watched the door. Then he turned off the last burner, always the last one, and began to clean the kitchen for the final time. Corinne wiped tables that no one would sit at again, straightened chairs that would belong to someone else by morning. Outside, Harwick went about its evening, unaware that anything had ended. The next morning came gray and cold. At 9, a sedan from Harwick First National pulled to the curb, followed by a county vehicle with 2 court officers. Within minutes, foreclosure notices appeared on the glass door. White paper, black text, the official language of an ending. The bell rang at 9:20. The man from the night before stepped inside. Same gray hoodie, same worn jeans, a folded $50 bill between 2 fingers. He stood in the doorway and read the notice taped to the glass. "You came back. I told you I would." The court officers moved through the dining room with clipboards, recording each item. Eldon sat at the near end of the counter, hands flat on the surface, watching 2 men move through the space Walt had built and he had maintained for 35 years. Very still. The man in the gray hoodie settled near the window and didn't speak, didn't take out a phone, just watched the room with the careful attention of someone who understood that what was happening mattered, even if it was none of his business. 20 minutes in, a black SUV pulled up outside. Garrett Hollis crossed the sidewalk with the ease of a man who had never once questioned his right to enter any room.
Charcoal vest, pressed shirt, leather shoes.
He pushed open the door, the one with the foreclosure notice on it, without pausing to read what it said. Eldon, a measured note of regret that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry to see it come to this. Walt built something real here. What do you want, Garrett?" "Just paying my respects. I've put in a bid on the property. Ties in with what we're developing on 5th. Parking structure on the Callaway side. Good for the neighborhood." The room was quiet enough to hear the scratch of the inventory officer's pen. Corinne placed her hand on Eldon's shoulder and felt the muscles tighten and then deliberately release. Eldon said nothing. He watched Hollis leave with an expression that wasn't anger. Something older, more considered. When the court officers finished and stepped outside, the man at the window walked to the counter and set the $50 bill down. For last night, Eldon shook his head. The diner's done. Keep it. Then keep it yourself. For whatever comes next. Eldon didn't reach for it. The man looked around one last time, the photographs, the clock, the 6 stools, then nodded to Corinne and walked to the door. Outside he stopped, stood still a moment with his back to the building, then took out his phone. Marcus. Foreclosure auction in Harwick, Ohio. Property called Marsh's Diner, Callaway Street at 5th Avenue. Timeline, assessed value, opening bid. Who else is likely to be in the room? Everything you can find. Call me back today. He put the phone away and walked north up the street. Hands in his pockets, no particular hurry, just another person on an ordinary October morning. In the weeks that followed, Eldon and Corinne moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the eastern edge of Harwick. $900 a month. Windows looking out over a parking lot. Eldon found work at Ridgeway Foods. Deli counter, $13 an hour. He sliced meats and portioned salads with the same hands that had run a professional kitchen for 35 years. He didn't explain to his coworkers what he'd done before. He just showed up and did the work. Corinne took the overnight shift at Sunrise Fuel off the highway interchange. $11 an hour. Behind reinforced glass until 3:30 in the morning. They managed, not falling apart, not recovering, just managing day by day, in the careful, exhausted way of people who have taken a significant blow and haven't yet decided what comes next. One evening in late November, Corinne looked at her husband across the small kitchen table. "Are you doing okay?" Eldon looked down at his plate. "Don't ask me that." She didn't ask again. They finished the meal in silence while the parking lot outside stayed empty and the light above it burned through the night. 5 months passed. The foreclosure auction was held on a Thursday morning at the Harwick County Courthouse. The property opened at $420,000. Eldon and Corinne didn't attend. Hollis climbed steadily round by round. By the later stages, he had reached $565,000. Then a final bid was entered on behalf of a company registered in Ohio under the name Quiet Road Holdings, LLC. $580,000. Hollis sat very still. Turned to his attorney. His attorney shook his head. Everything was in order. The auction closed. Hollis pushed back his chair and left without speaking to anyone. For days later, Eldon and Corinne received a letter. The debt of $320,000 had been satisfied in full. After fees, the remaining balance, $180,000, had been placed in an account in their name. Eldon held the letter at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he folded it and placed it in the top drawer of the dresser. "That's your father's money. Walt built that place. I'm not spending what came out of losing it." Corinne didn't argue. She knew which of his positions were movable and which were not. 3 weeks after the auction, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Marsh." Calm voice, slight roughness, familiar before she could place it. "I know this is unexpected. We met at the diner. Back in October. Is your husband home?" She stood with her hand on the button. "Come up. 3rd floor, apartment 9. The man in the hallway was wearing a gray hoodie. Not the same one, but close, dark jeans, plain canvas sneakers. He was holding a brown paper bag from Harwick Hearth, the bakery 2 blocks from the old diner. 2 coffees, a box of scones. No car waiting downstairs. No one behind him. Just a man with coffee and the look of someone who had thought carefully about what he wanted to say. Eldon was at the kitchen table with the newspaper. He looked up, registered the man, and set the paper down. The man placed the bag on the table and sat down across from Eldon without wasting time. "I'm the one who bought Marsh's Diner. Quiet Road Holdings, that's my company. I want to rebuild on that lot. Smaller, around 20 seats, a proper counter, a real kitchen. Then lease it back to you and your wife at $3,500 a month. I cover construction and equipment. You cover the rent once the place is running. Silence, except for the heating system somewhere below. Eldon placed both palms flat on the table and stood up.
No.
One word. No anger in it, which made it more final than anger would have been. I don't take handouts. Not from anyone. That's not something I'm willing to change. The man didn't flinch. You think this is charity? Isn't it?
No.
It's an investment. I've eaten in a lot of places, a lot of cities, a lot of countries. What you have in that kitchen isn't just technique. Technique can be taught. What you have is the reason people drive across town instead of stopping somewhere closer. The reason a stranger sat down at your counter on the worst night of your life and felt, for 40 minutes, like everything was going to be all right. He paused. I can't manufacture that. I want to invest in it because it's worth investing in. Eldon looked at him steadily. And who are you to show up at my door and tell me what my kitchen is worth? I'm the man you fed the last meal of that place without charging $1. On the night you were the one losing everything. He held Eldon's eyes. I think that gives me 10 minutes at this table. The words landed without drama. Simply true. Eldon turned and walked to the bedroom. The door closed behind him, not a slam. Just a man who needed to be on the other side of it. Corinne stood at the counter, one hand on its edge, looking at the closed door. What do you think? The man asked quietly. She didn't answer him. She knocked twice on the bedroom door, the way she had knocked 10,000 times before. Then she opened it. Eldon sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the parking lot below. When Corinne spoke, her voice was steady and clear, not the softness she usually brought to difficult conversations. This was not a soft moment. Eldon Marsh. I worked that counter for 28 years without a single complaint. I've done the overnight shift at that gas station until 3:30 in the morning and come home and made your coffee without saying one word about it. I will keep doing that for as long as I have to, and you know that. She stopped. But if there is a real chance, a real one, for you to get back behind a stove and for me to get back on a floor, doing what we have spent our entire lives doing together, your pride is not worth more than that. It is not. He didn't look away from the window. I want to see you cook again, not at a deli counter. Behind your own stove, for people who came in because they heard it was worth the drive. That's what I want. More than anything else I can think of right now. She didn't move from the doorway. Let the silence be what it was. The man had gotten up quietly and stood at the edge of the hallway, without stepping into the space between them. My mother used to say the strongest person in the room isn't the one who never needs help. It's the one who can accept it without losing who they are. Pause, voice lower. She was right about most things. She was right about that. He waited a moment. Set your conditions, whatever they are. I'll honor every one of them. Eldon finally turned from the window. He looked at Corinne. No argument left. Just a woman in a doorway telling her husband what she needed, and in the plainness of that, he found what he couldn't find on his own. He walked to the kitchen and sat back down. Counter height is my call. I decide where every piece of equipment goes, and I don't want anyone arguing with me about it once I've decided. Understood. My knives. My menu. I don't take suggestions about what goes on the plate. I wouldn't offer any. And the name, Marsh's Diner. It stays exactly as it was. There was never any other possibility, the man said. Corinne exhaled slowly. Not dramatic. Just the sound of a woman releasing something she'd been holding for a very long time. Construction began on a Monday in early June. Ron Calloway, the contractor, no relation to the street, had built more commercial spaces in Harwick than anyone in the county. He had never worked with anyone quite like Eldon Marsh. The counter was 2 inches too low. The sink needed to move 14 inches left. The floor tile was the wrong shade of cream. Ron called Keanu from the parking lot on 3 separate occasions. Each time, Keanu said some version of the same thing. Let him. That's the whole point. The project ran 3 weeks past the end date. Ron submitted his final invoice with a note that read, in its entirety, "Never again, but it looks right." It did look right. 20 seats, 8 counter stools, 3 booths along the south wall. A kitchen compact without being cramped. Every inch arranged exactly as Eldon had specified. Corinne rehung the old photographs. Walt behind the original counter, the diner's first anniversary, the street in winter decades ago, in the same arrangement, as though they'd never been anywhere else. On the morning of the soft opening, Eldon arrived 2 hours before anyone else. He stood in the kitchen alone for a few minutes, not doing anything, just standing in a space that fit him. Then he turned on the flat top, and the sound and smell of a professional kitchen coming to life filled the room, and he went to work. No announcement. No sign in the window, just the lights on and the door unlocked. By 10 o'clock, every stool at the counter was taken. Dana Price had written the food column for the Harwick Gazette for 11 years. On the third day after the soft opening, she walked in, took a counter seat, and ordered the blue plate special. She was halfway through the meal when she noticed the man at the far end of the counter. Dark hoodie, baseball cap, paperback open beside his coffee. Not drawing attention to himself, which was exactly why she noticed. People who work at not being noticed are usually worth noticing. She finished her meal, said something brief and genuine to Corinne about the food, and walked back to the Gazette offices on 3rd Street. She did not call out to the man. She did not take a photograph. She went to her desk and started making phone calls. For days later she had it, a careful reconstruction of everything that had begun on a Tuesday evening in late October. The foreclosure, the auction, quiet road holdings, the rebuilt diner on the same corner. Former customers. Public records. Ron Calloway, who was initially reluctant to talk and then, once he started, not reluctant at all. The article ran on a Thursday. Headline: "The Last Meal at Marsh's Diner, and the Man Who Came Back." A single photograph, Eldon and Corinne outside the new diner, her hand through his arm, both squinting in the early light. By Monday, the Associated Press had run a condensed version. Requests for comment arrived from Columbus, Cleveland, Chicago. Keanu said nothing, posted nothing. The story moved entirely on its own weight, carried by the gravity of something people recognized as true. Garrett Hollis read the article on Thursday evening. By Friday morning, he had called 2 attorneys. The story hadn't cost him money. It had cost him the quiet assumption surrounding his business dealings in Harwick for years, that when Hollis wanted something, he got it, and that the people in his way didn't have the standing to say anything about it. He moved indirectly. Within 2 weeks, clusters of negative reviews appeared on multiple platforms. Generic language, oddly consistent timing, bearing no resemblance to what actual customers were reporting. He contacted the county health department requesting a priority inspection of Marsh's diner. The inspector arrived, spent less than an hour, found nothing. Clean kitchen, correct temperatures, filed a passing report. Across town, Eldon ran the lunch service the same way he always did, without hurry, without distraction. He understood something Hollis apparently didn't. Over time, the reviews of people who had actually eaten the food would be louder than the reviews of people who hadn't. What Hollis had never accounted for was the patience of the people he had left behind him on the way up. Over the years, he had acquired and restructured several small food businesses across Harwick, cutting staff, reducing wages, treating institutional knowledge as a redundant cost. Most of those employees had moved on and said nothing. There was nowhere obvious to say it, and no reason to believe anyone would listen. Then Dana wrote her second article. Sylvia Brandt had managed one of the Hollis-acquired properties for 6 years before being replaced by a lower-paid supervisor. She had kept her emails, not strategically, just because organized people keep things. 3 more former employees contacted Dana in the following days, bringing documentation enough to support a detailed account of business practices the community had long suspected and never seen confirmed on paper. The second article ran 6 weeks after the first. Longer, more carefully sourced. It didn't accuse Hollis of anything the documentation didn't support. It didn't need to. 2 institutional investors withdrew from expansion discussions. A supplier of 8 years issued a quiet notice of non-renewal. 3 of 5 Harwick Grill Group locations saw drops in traffic that didn't recover. Hollis remained wealthy, remained technically operational. But the unquestioned authority he had held in Harwick for nearly a decade had been publicly interrupted in a way that couldn't be quietly resolved. What brought him to that point wasn't the man who bought the building on Calloway Street or the journalist who wrote about it. It was the accumulation of his own choices, made over years in rooms where he had believed the people across from him had no power and no memory. He had been wrong on both counts. The article had traveled further than Dana expected. It was read in Columbus by a 26-year-old named Dex Marsh, who almost scrolled past it before the name of the town stopped him. He read it once quickly, then again from the beginning. The article didn't name him. It was a story about his parents, his father's 35 years behind a stove, his mother's steadiness through a long, difficult chapter. The night a stranger had been treated with a dignity the situation didn't require. No editorializing, no sentiment, no easy conclusions. Dex set his phone down and sat with it for a while. He had left Harwick 3 years earlier telling himself things that seemed reasonable. He wasn't suited to the restaurant business. He and his father were too different. There was nothing wrong with wanting a different life. Some of it was true. None of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and harder. He had been afraid of the standard his father represented, and leaving had been easier than trying to meet it. He had been competent in Columbus. Steady job, not unpleasant. But he wasn't the version of himself he could most clearly imagine when he thought about who he was supposed to become. He looked at the photograph, his parents in the early morning light, his mother's hand through his father's arm. He recognized something in his father's posture he hadn't had vocabulary for when he was younger. Not stubbornness. The specific bearing of a person who knows exactly what they're doing and why, and has never needed anyone else to confirm it. His father had spent 35 years building something a stranger would drive across town for, and remember, Dex gave 2 weeks' notice the following Monday. He drove to Harwick on a Saturday evening in late August, parked on Calloway Street and sat in the car a few minutes, looking at the hand-painted sign, the warm light through the windows, the movement visible behind the counter. Then he got out and walked to the door. Dinner service was running. Every counter stool taken. Corinne was moving between tables with the efficiency of someone who has performed the same motions for decades. She looked up when the door opened, the way she always looked up, and she stopped. Dex stood in the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, with the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they intend to say and realized none of it is adequate. "Come in, Dex," she said. "No accusation." No performance. Just a woman who had been waiting for this without knowing she was waiting, who wasn't going to make it harder than it needed to be. She directed him to the small back room behind the kitchen. Through the wall he could hear his father's movements, unhurried and certain, the same rhythm he had grown up near without ever fully understanding what it was. The service ran until 9. When the last customer had gone and the door was locked, the 3 of them sat at the counter. Dex said what he had come to say. Not the rehearsed version, the actual version, slower and less organized and more honest. He didn't ask for anything, didn't make promises. He said what was true and left it there. Eldon listened without interrupting. "You want to learn this business, you start from the beginning. No shortcuts because you're my son. You start where everyone starts." "I know. The beginning," Eldon said, "is the dishes." Corinne pressed her lips together in something that wasn't quite a smile but was close to it. "Come back Monday morning. 7 o'clock. Dex nodded. He looked at his father one more time. Eldon met his eyes and gave a single nod, the same nod he had given to the man in the gray hoodie in that small apartment kitchen, then turned back toward the kitchen. It wasn't forgiveness as an event. It was forgiveness as a door left open. Dex understood the difference, and understood the open door was more than he had come expecting to find. He was there Monday at 10 minutes to 7. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm. Dishes, sweeping, prep work, the correct way to break down vegetables, what portion weights were supposed to feel like, temperature discipline Eldon considered non-negotiable. Eldon corrected each mistake with the same neutral precision he would have brought to any other employee. The standard was slightly higher for Dex, in the way standards are higher for people we most want to see succeed. One Saturday in October, a regular customer, Mrs. Aldridge, a retired teacher who had been coming since the original diner, looked up from her plate. "It's good to see a young one learning the trade." Dex, refilling her coffee, said, "I'm learning it slowly." "That's the right way," she said simply, and went back to her breakfast. Eldon said nothing, but Corinne noticed that he glanced at Dex once, briefly, with the expression he wore when something met the standard he had set in his own mind, and he had no intention of saying so out loud. She had been reading that expression for 28 years. She knew what it meant. By the end of its first full season, the diner's monthly revenue had reached $45,000, more per seat than the original location had ever produced. The rent of $3,500 was paid on the first of every month from the diner's earnings. The $180,000 remained untouched. What they earned, they spent. What they saved honestly. On a Tuesday morning in mid-November, a small wooden sign appeared beside the front door. Left outside before opening, wrapped in brown paper, no note attached. Corinne unwrapped it and held it up so Eldon could see from behind the counter. One word, carved into pale wood in plain, clean letters. Integrity. Eldon looked at it for a moment. "Put it up." Corinne found a nail and hung it beside the door at eye level, where everyone entering would see it. It simply said what it said, and let that be enough. A few weeks later, the man in the gray hoodie came back. He arrived on a Wednesday between breakfast and lunch, when the room was quiet. Same stool, far end, closest to the wall. He set a paperback on the counter and looked up when Corinne came over. "Coffee, and whatever's good. Soup today. He made the bread this morning." "That sounds right." He sat for the better part of an hour. Read in the spaces between. Didn't use his phone. When Dex came out from the kitchen, the man looked up and noticed him. "Your son." "He came back about 3 months ago," Corinne said. "He's learning." The man nodded slowly, the way people nod when something confirms what they had hoped might be true. Before he left, he paid in cash. Exact change, tip larger than the bill. Eldon had come out to wipe down the counter near the register, and the two men found themselves a few feet apart. "You doing all right?" the man asked. It was the same question Corinne had asked in the apartment on that bleak November evening, and Eldon had told her not to ask it. This time he considered it for a moment. "Better," he said. The man nodded once, picked up his book, lifted a hand to Corinne, walked to the door. The bell rang once as he stepped out onto Calloway Street. Through the window, they watched him walk north. Hands in his pockets, no particular pace, just another person on an ordinary Wednesday morning who had somewhere to be and no need to explain where. Some stories are remembered because they end in extraordinary ways. This one is worth remembering for something simpler. On the worst night of his life, with everything already gone, Eldon Marsh cooked a meal for a stranger, charged nothing, and meant every word he said about why. Not because anyone was watching. Not because it would serve him later. Because after 35 years of doing things a certain way, there was no other version of himself available for the occasion. What followed wasn't inevitable. It happened because one person made one choice in one moment, with no reason to believe it would matter. The flat top at Marsh's diner runs every morning. The coffee is always fresh. Most days all 8 stools are taken before 9, and there is usually someone waiting near the door. The sign beside the entrance says one word. It says everything that needs to be said.